And we're back so soon after the last episode. We said that we weren't going to leave it so long, and in fact, we took 5 days to get back together. So this is positive. This is Henry Weston's Old Mate. It's the podcast. I'm Phil Walton. Stu Butler is with me again. How are you doing, Stu?
I'm really well, thank you, Phil. It's good to see you again after a short period of time with a flashy new haircut.
Like, well, my forehead has turned into a 5 head. It takes me longer to wash my face now, but you know how that feels. Yeah, but yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, the weather's turned chilly, so you've got a jumper on for a change, but it's still.
Yeah, well, it's a long sleeve shirt, and it's from a plate. It's a Russian football shirt, so I suppose they all wear long sleeves over there. Probably stops them getting the AstroTurf birds as well, because it's all 3G now, or 4G, I guess.
But yeah. I guess so. So, yeah, just the regular check-in then. Weekend all right?
Yeah, good weekend. You know, our Saturday started well, and then I just had a little low. I don't know why. That's what happened. I think everyone has them. But I didn't have my morning run, but I'd run Thursday, Friday. And I think Erica, my wife, and my daughter were out. And I just got a little bit, I don't know, down on myself. But I took myself out for a run in the rain. That seemed to do the trick. And then I attended the Warmer CC Cricket Club quiz. So it was positive in the sense that I was feeling a bit down. And I did consider crying off the quiz, but I didn't. And I'm glad I didn't.
Good. Did you win?
We come third out of 11. We were in the running up till round 8, at a shocking round 9. But then our two closest competitors got 10 out of 10 and 9 out of 10 in the final round. And I think we mustered a 6 or a 7, so we missed it by a mile in the end. But we were in the running for a good bit.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Okay, so this podcast tonight is going to focus mainly on Stu coming out, but, but there is
That's news for my wife.
Well, yeah. Well, we're going to leave as a cliffhanger. We're going to leave it like that until we get there. But I think there's probably a little bit more to focus on. I think just given like the episode that we did last time and the discussions that you and I have, and I follow you on Strava, and your exercises quite clearly plays an important role in your ongoing recovery. So
yeah,
I guess I just want to touch base really that make sure that we covered everything that you wanted to cover. I think that there is probably more importance attached to it than we gave it credit to last time. So just to follow up on that really around, getting out in the rain and running, like those sorts of things, you talk about it fairly often. So what it is that's doing for you and why it's not necessarily extreme, but it is high level of commitment.
Yeah, well, as I've mentioned numerous times before, and I mentioned at the start of this podcast a few seconds ago, sitting around all day doesn't seem to do me any good. And what I've learned is, and it particularly doesn't do me any good if I'm on my own. And I used to love it, or I used to look forward to it, but now I don't. And so if I have a day off over the weekend, well, I have most days off at the weekend this time of year. I try to get my exercise in early, and it seems to set my day up. And anyone who exercises regularly, like yourself on your bike and all the things you've done over the years, exercise becomes a little bit addictive, doesn't it? If you're someone like me who's not necessarily battled sort of weight issues, but I've always worried about my weight. I don't know why, but I've always tried to manage it, and exercise is a very good way of doing that. I like to eat, pizza and ice cream and stuff, and I like to exercise. But what I found in recovery, let's get back to that, is that I could focus or channel if I quickly found that if I could push myself in my exercise, I soon realised that allowed me to push myself in other aspects of my life. So, for example, I wrote about it. I used to go out on a 6 or 7 mile loop down towards my parents' house along the seafront, and I'd come home and I could add about half a kilometre onto my run. Absolutely nothing, 3 or 4 minutes. But for a period of 6 months, I made myself do it every single day. Come rain, shine, snow, wind, whatever. And I did it. But what I then found, and it seems silly, but what I then found was putting out the bin bags became a nothing chore to me. And it's not a big chore, but I found myself doing it. I found myself not making excuses in my head to do things that a lot of people would do without thinking. But someone maybe in recovery like myself or struggles with, mental ups and downs, there would be times when putting the food recycling bin out, I'd think about doing it, and then I'd find myself 4 hours later I haven't done it, and my wife would come in from work or something, and the food recycling bin was full. And she said, "Well, why didn't you do it?" And I don't know why I didn't do it. It's a silly example, but what I found from pushing myself with exercise, and very gently, it would have been very gently. We're not talking climbing mountains or anything. It was simply adding 4 or 5 minutes onto a run, but it allowed me to develop. And it sounds silly again, develop a skill like that in life, but it did. That's what I found. Exercise, by pushing myself in exercise, allowed me to then push myself in everyday life.
Yeah, I think it's my feeling around exercise is a bit of a blunt tool for kind of life lessons almost as well. That if you want to run a marathon or a half marathon, or you want to ride 100 miles or whatever, you just can't go out and do it straight off the bat. It just doesn't work. You have to build up, you have to practice, you have to work at these things. And these are kind of like the sorts of things that we tell our children, that, things don't just come easily. You have to work hard at them and you have to put the time in. But then as an adult, you forget, or you just don't apply the same principles to yourself in your everyday life. So then when we forget that actually we need to mentally check in with ourselves. We need to, take that checklist and kind of like, am I all right today? What's going on? Am I cognizant of how I'm feeling?
Yeah.
And I think those, like I say, I think exercise can act as a blunt tool. One, to demonstrate, hard work gets you places, but also secondly, being active. Your example about putting the bins out is spot on, because everybody is able to demonstrate that lack of motivation for mundane chores,
Yeah.
and we've all got that willful blindness that the bin is at the top of the lid, it's overflowing. Somebody else will do it.
Yeah.
I can be willfully blind until somebody does it, or until I can't actually squeeze any more in there, and then I do it in a fucking huff because it's my job again. But I mean, those extra, you can tell that this has been going on today. But yeah, no, those extra 4 or 5 minutes out running, it just kind of pushes those energy levels up. The motivation comes up a little bit, and that's important. Yeah, and I think being able to, like you just said, getting out in all weathers, no excuses for going out for a run means there's no excuses for not putting the bins out, or making the beds, or that all the boring chores.
Yeah, I'm not very good at that, but making the beds.
Well,
But
you've got sleeping
no.
bags in your house, haven't you? Is that right?
Yeah, apparently little one does. But what it also, I suppose, as a father now, we all want to set good examples for our children, don't we? And I'm hoping that my skills that I'm learning by pushing myself, and I'm hoping that this will sort of rub off on my daughter, that because I don't want her to think that it's acceptable to sit around on the sofa all day. Sometimes we do have days where sometimes it's quite nice, and it's what you want to do. But sadly for me, a day, if I spent all day on the sofa, it normally means something's wrong. And my wife understands it. She understands it better than anyone. Probably understands it better than myself. I said to her when we went we went out yesterday, and I was telling her, I was feeling a bit down yesterday. She said, "Yeah, I noticed. She said you were sort of fine when we left, and then when we came back, you seemed to have taken a bit of a turn for the worst." And I don't think anything had particularly triggered it. No, I can't think of anything that had triggered it, but it just came over me. Strange, isn't it? But I'd like to think I'm able to set a slightly better example now for those sort of people who our children do rely on us for us to set the correct example, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So when there's times like that, just thinking about being cognizant about mental health, and I've just just told you about kind of like a checklist, and I'll share that with you in a minute, actually. But what is is there a mental process that you go through? Like, I think for people who are familiar with their own mental health challenges, are probably more practiced at kind of going,
yeah,
I can feel myself on the downslope.
Yeah, I'll just briefly run through situation Saturday. So my daughter has a swimming lesson at 7:55 on a Saturday, nice and early. So my wife and daughter left home at about 20 to 8. I watched telly for about 45 minutes because it was, Saturday off, nothing wrong with that. And then I put my Xbox on. I had something to do on the Xbox. Didn't particularly enjoy playing the Xbox, but turned it off and sat around watching nothing on the telly for about 30 minutes. And I just suddenly realised that I was on the downward spiral. And again, we've said it before, I can't explain what I wasn't playing games online, so it wasn't like I lost a game I should have won or I felt hard done by. I realised something was on the downturn. So for me, the first thing I do, if I catch it early enough, is turn the telly off and get up. So I got off the sofa. I came into the kitchen, and I actually edited our previous podcast.
Yeah.
But when I sat down to edit it, I had about 1% motivation. I'd just gone like that in the space of 20 minutes. But by the time I'd finished editing, about an hour and a half later, I was much better. Not great, but the girls came back and we had a nice bit of lunch and fiddled around a bit for about an hour, and then they went off to a party. And it was peeing it down with rain, but I knew that I had to get out and exercise. I don't have an exercise bike anymore at home. In the past, I'd have jumped on the exercise bike and just got a good sweat on. Yeah. But I had to go out because we've got a few weights around here, but that's not really my thing. I needed to have a run, to be honest. I needed to do something, get the heart rate right up. And to be honest, by the time I got back from that run, I was soaked to the underpants and muddy and everything. But I was back to probably where I started the day. Yeah. But I could have quite easily, and probably 5 times out of 10 in the past, I wouldn't have edited that podcast and I wouldn't have gone for a run. And that probably would have resulted in Sunday being a struggle, because Sunday I would have then had to do the process of getting myself back with exercise, doing the podcast or writing a blog. So that's the process for anyone watching, or that's my process.
Yeah. So this is something quite new to me in that I've taken quite a formulaic approach to kind of checking this out. And I'd come across this psychologist, I think she is, on Twitter, who has a special interest in autistic burnout syndrome, right. Which is, I'm quite late diagnosed being autistic, but I've recognised the burnout symptoms for a long time. And it normally comes about that when I've been out and about, out of my comfort zone for a long time. So whether it's socializing, whether it's like a couple of weeks ago, I've spent a whole week in Belfast. I did all my work stuff in the day, and then I was away with colleagues in the evening. So I was kind of always on.
Yeah.
And I need to build in, just to manage myself, downtime, where I can just shut down, think of nothing, headphones on, whatever. And getting back from that, I was just on a real downer in that, not mentally, but absolutely psychologically, physically, cognitively exhausted. Couldn't string a sentence together, didn't have a memory to speak of, just no motivation, anything. And where you've just said, spending the weekend on the sofa is bad for you, I actually had no other choice but to spend the weekend on the sofa, physically shutting down. But the psychologist, sorry, that's a long way round saying, but the psychologist has brought out like a checklist.
Oh, okay.
And you give yourself a score, and you kind of do it once a week, once every fortnight, or something like that, just to check in with yourself. How are you getting on? Because sometimes it can just hit you like a flash, and it takes you out of the blue, really. So I've found kind of a mechanical, formulaic approach for me, just kind of going, am I all right? How am I feel? How's my memory? Am I able to articulate what I'm trying to say? That sort of stuff has actually been really helpful. So there might be other stuff out there for people that have struggled with their mental health as well.
Just one thing while you're there, Phil, that's resonated with me there, that you mentioned that you had no memory.
Yeah.
When I am in the middle of, I don't know if mental episode is the right word, because my anxiety doesn't stop me doing much. It will slow down the process. But if I am having a bad day and not really realizing it, if I catch it late, let's say, if I catch it late on a Saturday, when I wake up on a Sunday morning, Saturday is hazy like a hangover, and it's bizarre. It's only something it's something I've come to understand probably in the last 6 months, that my memory suffers when I am at a high or in a high state of anxiety. And it's actually something I've made a note here, because I haven't actually done any research on it. I assume it's a recognized side effect or something, but I need to read up on it, because it's something I was thinking the other day. And I've thought about it but I've never researched it. But I really do. If I have a bad day mentally, I can remember bits of the day before, but there'll be some days where vast amounts of hours they're a blur. They're not completely gone, but there you go. Strange, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, I think I get that in my burnout, but I also have kind of the immediate loss of memory in respect of I can be mid-sentence and not remember a word. But
that's a real short term as well.
Yeah, so that can be like every sentence as well. I'll be talking about something mundane about, what does everybody want for lunch? And I'll have to ask the same question 4 or 5 times, because one child will say beans on toast, the other one will say cheese on toast, and my wife will say, a salad, and I won't remember what any of them have said. And I'll have to go, and then I'll just go, child 1, come here, tell me again what. In fact, why don't you're 14, go and do it yourself. Actually, you don't need me.
I tell you what I'd say is the salad and the beans on toast can go out the window. Everyone's having cheese on toast, because that's the best option there.
Exactly. Right. Anyway, enough of that nonsense. So, anything else you want to talk about in respect of exercise or mental health check-ins before we move on?
Oh, I think we covered it. You covered it excellently there as well, Phil, because one of my final notes today was that I'd written here that I have to manage myself daily. I think when I wrote that, I probably don't manage myself daily. It might do me good to actually manage myself daily, but I don't complete a weekly check-in like you've just described. But probably, do you know what? Probably writing my blog probably does that subconsciously for me. And as I'm currently only writing on a Tuesday, that's probably where I do my weekly check-in. I would recommend it to anyone, really. It certainly doesn't do you any. If you have enough time once a week to write down your thoughts, what's been good, what's been not so good, what's got you down, because if it might take, might only take you writing it 3 or 4 weeks, playing FIFA 21 on Xbox. If that occurs, or meeting up with your mate every time you meet up with someone, you know, there are things. Sometimes there are people in your life that aren't actually good for you. Habits.
Yeah.
If you're writing that list and the same thing keeps cropping up, you might not want to throw them in the bin, delete them from WhatsApp, but you might want to have a look at, you know, what it is that's getting you down about a certain thing, a certain person, a certain situation. Just an idea.
Yeah, no, good shout. So almost as if that was scripted, though, you've referenced your blog, and this is kind of the coming out stage. So I guess so coming out in terms of being public about your alcoholic history.
Yes.
Was really the turn of this year. So New Year's Day was when I first, so as we'd said on right at the very beginning, there was a long gap between me and you kind of catching up, kind of, I don't know, 10, 15 years. But part of that, well, the thing that triggered that from my point of view was you had written a blog. I was sat there on New Year's Day doing nothing, clicked on it and went, fuck, you've got no idea what happens in people's lives. And then all of a sudden there's like 2-3 year history of you having like the worst time. And this is kind of the Facebook life that we all live, isn't it? That kind of everything looks rosy until you open the real front door and then you get a glimpse into everybody's life. But so I guess before we talk about the blog and the what about it and what it does and all of those sorts of things, why did you decide to come out and be more public? I know you would never kept it secret, and people around you will have known about the struggles that you've had, but putting it on the internet makes it accessible to the world. Whether or not the world reads it or not is a different thing, but it makes it accessible to the world. So why was that?
The alcoholic bit was an accident, really, or the blog. Oh yeah, well, the blog wasn't an accident because I finally made a conscious decision that I needed to change a few things in my life. And one being the amount of money I spent on Russian football shirts. So I decided I was going to write a blog to hold myself accountable because I had a list on it's still up on my fridge over there, actually. I wrote a list of what I wasn't going to spend money on. And my wife saw me pin it to the fridge and laugh, blah, 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 no chance. But you know what? I thought I've always liked the idea of writing stuff, never been very good at it. But I thought if I put this down on a blog, I used Twitlonger initially. It's there. I'm going to put it out there. If one person or 100 million people read it, I am then accountable for the next 365 days of what I'm going to spend. It's not been. We don't need to go into how that's gone. It's gone better. It's gone better than I'd probably have hoped. I have bought a few football shirts, but I haven't been completely abstinent from spending. Or I haven't abstained from spending completely, like I had set out to do. But I can't remember. I'll be perfectly honest. I meant to research my earliest blogs in the last couple of hours, and I haven't. So I can't tell you the exact blog that I mentioned that I was a recovering alcoholic. It may well have been the first one. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But that, literally, the first time I mentioned it, I got private responses from 5 or 6 people. Close friends, someone like yourself, a couple of guys I used to play cricket with, a couple of people who already knew that I was a recovering alcoholic, but I don't think they understood. People weren't a few people were aware of the hospitalization, but not a lot of people were. And then I wrote a few more blogs. And I got some sort of more responses, but then I got some really positive responses, and every now and again, someone would sort of just mention, please keep up the writing. So that was, I had planned in my head I'd like to blog for a year. I had no idea what I'd blog about for a year. I assumed that I must have thought that my story would come into it, but to answer your initial question that I've blabbed on about, it came about as a bit of an accident from me putting myself out there to try and be accountable for spending too much money on rubbish.
Okay. And it's interesting. I thought I was thinking about this, and again, kind of not to make it all about me, but to share a similar experience is that when I've been open about kind of my mental health struggles, or I did an autism kind of coming out thing. It wasn't quite like that, but I made it clear on like a social media post that I've recently had an autism diagnosis, and it kind of restores your faith in the people that you know, and also the better side of social media, because it is a fucking cesspit a lot of the time. But people checking in with you, just kind of going, man, I'd never know that. And, you know, brave for coming out, or brave for speaking about whatever. And, you know, friends that from back home that I don't see or talk to very often, been in touch, and just kind of like, all you have to do, mate, is pick up the phone. You haven't got my number, but pick up the phone. So that kind of, that must have been, I don't know, quite a reassuring thing after kind of exposing yourself, making yourself vulnerable.
Yeah, I'm coming out and exposing myself
Yeah.
to the world.
But it's quite a vulnerable place to put yourself.
Yes, yes, and I don't know if it's just I've never been shy of speaking my mind, but it became quite apparent in one of the very early blogs I wrote. My wife said to me, she said, "That is extremely brave," and I honestly didn't feel brave. I didn't. In my head, I was just like, you know, this is what I've been through, and what harm could I don't, you know what, Phil? I don't even think initially. I don't even think I had that nice. What's going on my camera? I don't even think I was particularly thinking this might help other people. That sort of came a bit later on. But when my wife said, you know, that's really brave, and that will probably surprise or shock a few people. Not shock, but I didn't see it as brave. It sounds strange, but I just thought, you know, it's something that once I'd written a couple and got some nice responses, and then obviously I've discussed in my notes with you that I then got a message from someone. I got a message from a couple of people I knew asking for not necessarily advice on how to maybe, or they got in touch with me with some concerns about their own drinking habits. Yeah. And I thought, well, you know, if I chatted with people on the phone. I said, look, I can offer you my story. I can offer you looking back, what I should have looked out for, potentially what you could look out for. I'm not a doctor. I haven't studied anything like this, but I could certainly offer, what I could offer was 100% support. And then then after that, someone got in touch with me on Twitter who I didn't know, asking if I could, you know, help them to potentially try and reduce their alcohol intake. Yeah. And that really, well, what that really did was made me feel really, sounds soft, but warm inside. It didn't make me feel special, but it made me feel that what my story could potentially help one other person. And it's that cliche, isn't it? If this story helps one other person, but if it does, and then I got to the point in my head where I was like, I should really keep this going because it's helping people.
Yeah, and I think it becomes the level of importance grows in it as well. Where perhaps at the start it was just about you, like you say, holding yourself accountable and maybe sharing a little insight into your world, then opens up to be far more important to other people because they're at the stage that you perhaps were in the early stages of 2018.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I was I was lucky. I had a huge support network of family and friends. But as we've discussed and as I've written before, many people don't, and they are the truly vulnerable people who are going through recovery, potentially in a location they don't understand, with no money in their pockets, and no one to call for support. My blog, isn't big enough to get out there yet. Maybe it will one day if I could carry it on. But somebody could stumble across it. I ask people to share it across social media. I'd like to think there are a couple of people out there who've stumbled across it and it has, helped. And that's why we will continue to produce blogs and produce podcasts.
Yeah. So we've spoken about the reasons for continuing on with it, but what has it actually done for you in the process of writing? What has it been able to do for you?
It actually became, along with my running, it became my other main tool in recovery. As we said a few minutes ago, I used it. I probably use it more as a subconscious sort of personal check-in now, but previously I used it as a way to project my emotions onto paper, get them out of my head, get them written down. And I wrote many blogs that I went back and edited pieces out, because when I reread them, I was like, this is stuff for me. This is stuff that the world doesn't need to see. But it allowed me to, I guess, evaluate myself, at certain periods. It allowed me to evaluate my mental state on a daily basis. I did have periods where I was probably writing 4 or 5 times a week. But there were there was a few not so good things about the blog. And one thing that I never wanted the blog to become my agony aunt or Stuart's daily whinge column. And I have to admit that on a few occasions it did. My emotions got the better of me. A couple of things in relation to incidents that happened at work, and I penned my thoughts, not mentioning any names or not mentioning any particular specifics. And then I hit the publish button, knowing that, or almost in the hope that certain people might read what I'd written, and that is not what the blog is for. We all make mistakes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think being able to, rein yourself in and kind of realize, I'm not going to go down that avenue, because that's not interesting to people, first of all, but it's also a bit self-destructive.
Yes. Yeah. Completely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess then, when it's been good, I guess there's been kind of quite cathartic to get your thoughts on a page, make sense of everything that you've been through, because in psychology terms there would be a whole field day of kind of work to go through and make sense of this trauma that you've been through over a 5, 6, 7 year period, really, when it's been really acute, and then in recovery. So being able to put that down on page and make sense of it for yourself must have been, well, I'm guessing, quite helpful.
Yes, well, it has allowed me to reflect on times in my life when, if I often refer back to that third summer I did in Holland in 2014 before I moved home to get married. And if I wasn't, I'd have become a full-blown alcoholic in Holland if I had not moved home that summer. I can reflect back and realise where my drinking had got to, but I can also reflect back to a time, when I lived in the Czech Republic, and I was actually some of my failed memoir writing. But when I actually started writing about, there was one blog that I never actually published, but I look back and I'd been with a girlfriend for about 5 years before I went there. And I look back, and the first 6 months I was in the Czech Republic, I was in a pretty bad depression. Looking back, I'd looking back, I'd have said it would probably be far beyond anxiety then. I must have been an absolute nightmare to live and work with the other guys who live with me. I came out of it, but when I look back, and there were times when, I was really down for weeks on end out there, because of a relationship breakdown. That happens, but I didn't recognise it as that. I drank a lot then. I probably self-medicated, but I wouldn't have reflected back on that time if I wasn't writing.
Yeah, no, interesting, really interesting. So, were you just thinking? Were you when you start getting into kind of writing blogs and that sort of stuff? I haven't done it myself, so I don't know. But do you go off looking at other people's blogs and see what they're writing about? Are you researching how to even put it together? Are you researching what kind of interesting for people? When to even?
No. I should have, and let's like to think I will going forward, because I do want to continue writing, but I have, and it's something I haven't actually done for my podcast either. My youngest brother got me the Idiot's Guide to Podcasting that I haven't written. But what I've been writing for the best part of a year now, and my readership, if that's a word, it's plateaued, and that's fine. It's not something I do for financial gain or with a view to being, any sort of income. But I think there must be ways that I could improve the blog circulation, and probably the way I don't structure my blog. I just pen my thoughts. We'll go on to talk about it in a minute, and a lot of my thoughts do come from listening. So not necessarily. So I don't read many blogs. I read a couple. But what I do is listen to podcasts, and this may well sound scripted again, but we will lead into the podcast. BECCA's Unashamed Alcoholic podcast, that had nothing. That initially I started listening to BECCA, the Canadian woman who started podcasting, about her story, but she gets some very famous guests, mainly Canadians and North American guests, to discuss their stories of addiction. But what I used that for in the initial sort of 2 or 3 months I was listening to BECCA's podcast, I'd listen to 1 hour of BECCA and her guest, and I'd come up with 4 blogs in my head. I'd listen to somebody mention, hiding, how they used to hide their vodka bottles. I'd be like, oh, bang, there's a blog. And then it'd be like, listen to somebody else talk about how they became sort of reclusive and stopped socializing. I'm like, oh wow, that was me in this and that. There's another blog. So that was my research, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. So for anybody that's listening that wants to buy Stuart a Christmas present, audiobooks are the way to go, because clearly he reads the first 5 pages of a book and puts it down.
Yeah, but I listened to. I must have listened to 15 books this year, and had numerous hours of podcasts, thousands of hours of podcasts.
Okay, good. So we got that straight. Audible vouchers are well received.
Yeah.
So I guess then. So yeah, I mean, a podcast is, in some ways, it's an auditory blog anyway, isn't it? But I think when there's, as well as it acting as kind of an inspiration for subject matter, it also can provide, I guess, a level of relatability for you, and kind of, yes, it's thought provoking, but it can help you articulate your feelings. And again, I think there is a subculture in autism, and a vernacular, a language, a parlance, things you do say and the things you don't say. I guess every realm has that when you get below the skin of kind of the mainstream knowledge of alcoholism, there is something and you picked me up on it in one of the episodes when I said when you were an alcoholic, and I knew straight away that I'd said the wrong thing. You rightly corrected it in saying I'm still an alcoholic, but I'm not drinking.
Yeah, I'm a sober one.
Say again?
I'm a sober one.
The sober one, that's it. But there's, I guess it opened your eyes to that kind of that culture and language that helps you articulate your history and now your future when you're able to describe that to people. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, spot on there, mate. And what I found with particularly listening to BECCA's podcast, I mean, I listened to the first one because we've all done it. You'll listen to 10 minutes of a podcast and you'll probably never go back to it if you don't like what you hear in the first 10 minutes. But I just found the first 10 minutes of the first episode I listened to, BECCA was asking the questions that I'd want to ask someone. You know, it's a simple question, but how do you refer to yourself? I mean, if someone asks me, I refer to myself as a recovering alcoholic. A lot of alcoholics won't, or they will just simply say, I don't drink, or I'm in recovery. But it was just good. And BECCA's story seemed to follow a similar lines to mine. The time scale, you know, of sobriety, we're both on she's just ticked over 4 years. I'm just approaching 4 years. She's been doing her podcast for just over a year. I've been blogging for about a year. She, you know, didn't align completely with the 12-step program. You know, she recently posted on her social media that her sponsor is no longer her sponsor, and that wasn't BECCA's decision, but because her sponsor just didn't feel that her and BECCA aligned within the same program anymore. And that happens, but it's something that it just seems that, and a lot of the guests that she had on, you know, her initial sort of decision to be open about her alcoholism was based on a hockey player, Bobby Ryan. You know ice hockey better than I do, Phil. You pointed out to me that he was an Ottawa senator, but he'd been very public about his battle with alcoholism, and BECCA, being a strong Canadian lady, loves her ice hockey. I think like probably every Canadian does. Doesn't matter if they're a man or a woman. But she will put Bobby Ryan down. She says he's the man who inspired, the person who inspired her to share her story. Mm-hmm. And I can't say that BECCA inspired me because I was already blogging about my alcoholism before I came across the Unashamed Alcoholic. But it has been such a useful tool in my recovery and in my blogging. And now it's getting a bit of feedback. And now it's you know, I certainly, it must have some sort of input on the way I probably, or we do our podcast and I do my podcast when I'm not sharing the microphone with you, Phil.
Yeah, no, that's I kind of, again, there's parallels that I can draw on from my experience with a late autism diagnosis, with people that you just kind of mentally connect with, that their story speaks to you a bit, and you kind of follow them because they speak sense as well, and they give good advice, or they, not necessarily advice, but it's kind of cautionary tales that, you know, watch out for the pitfalls here and there. And it's exciting, really, with you mentioning BECCA, because like I've listened to a few of her podcasts. I'm going to do a bit more homework around that as well. And you're right, she's articulate and she speaks very well around the subject. And she's also agreed to come on this pod to come and talk to us about. I don't know what we're going to talk to us about, but I guess we're going to talk about her journey, her recovery journey. I think we've got there from this pod's point of view that there's no need to go back and kind of dwell in the actively drinking phase.
Yeah.
Not long, but I think the purpose of this pod now has probably got some ongoing value and legacy in kind of supporting people through recovery. And she brings some good experience, and she's spoken to a lot of people with interesting experiences as well.
Yeah, well, she's been, like I say, she's just clicked over a year, I believe, of podcasting, and she clicked over 10,000 downloads a few months back. So she's really, she's really kicking its ass, the game over there. She seems to be doing really well.
Yeah, I mean, it's only a few more than us on this but like you say, she's been doing it for more than a year now, so that's fine. I mean, by the time we get to a year, it'll be 10,000, I think. So we'll she can help celebrate with us at that point. But yeah, we're hoping then if we can get the time zones lined up and at a convenient time for all three of us, we'll get BECCA on the podcast, and we'll line up an interesting show, and she can bring some of her experience to us mumbling idiots, and help us through a decent podcast that's hopefully going to be useful for people on the side.
Yeah, she will bring obviously the story of why she decided to share her story, why she decided to go public, and as I've mentioned, it was based on the fact that an ice hockey player had decided to go public. She will, I won't ruin it all, but she will explain to us why she decided that she didn't want to be ashamed of using the word alcoholic. She didn't use it for the first 3 years in sobriety. The podcast is The Unashamed Alcoholic, because she wants to be an unashamed alcoholic, and she will go on to tell us, all the positives. There's been some negatives in the last year of sobriety. She's got divorced and moved house, but she started dating again, and she'll tell us all about the positives and a few negatives, I'm sure. But I, for one, I'm not going to refer to it as my podcast hero, but it will certainly be really interesting to hook up with BECCA and yourself and share a few tales, Phil.
Perfect. Okay, so that seems like a good place to end this evening's episode. And that's we say it every time. It has flown by.
It has. That's got to be the t-shirts for the podcast. It's flown by.
It's flown by. Yeah, we're going to have to check out the merchandise store coming soon. Yeah. So all right. So next episode then we hope will be BECCA. If not, then we have plenty of other material that we're going to be talking about. So anybody wants to drop us a question or BECCA, HWOM the pod at gmail.com, or at Stu Butts on Twitter. And we will we'll look forward to the next show.
Lovely. Can't wait.
Thanks, Stu. Been really good.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Always a pleasure.
Bye-bye.